Hey, Chris here. It is Friday. It is not Friday the 13th, but it's summer, it's Friday, so we're going to do Friday the 13th. We're going to talk about that. Wonderful film from 1980. So, what can we say about this movie? I guess I'll just go into the plot real quick and a little bit with the cast as we're going along. It was directed by Sean S. Cunningham. It was released May 9th of 1980. I had that memorized for some reason. It's about a group of camp counselors headed by Steve Christy, who is played by Peter Brower in this film. Had to look up his name for a minute. And he's just his dream is to get this Camp Crystal Lake up and running again. It's been kind of his family's life project. Apparently he's blown all his savings into it. So that's his passion. That's what he wants to do. He's trying to get this thing going. And he's recruited some counselors that are willing to help out and then counsel the kids once the camp opens. So they've had a lot of bad luck, with water having issues in the past and the water going bad and fires and this, that, and the other. And, it's just someone's trying to sabotage them, basically. And now all these camp counselors start to disappear one by one. And it kind of plays off like an Agatha Christie 10 Little Indians type of vibe, actually. And it's quite the mystery for this first outing. Spoiler alert, by the way. This is going to be a bunch of spoilers. So, this came out in 1980. It's 43 years old now. I'm 50. Came out when I was 7. Don't remember the ad. And it was at the height of when all that was coming around. All the horror kind of late 70s, he knows you're alone, psycho slasher, drama, all that stuff was happening. And thus the slasher era was born, and Friday the 13th kind of sealed the deal. I got a huge sense of nostalgia from this one because it just reminds me of summer camp. I've never been to summer camp, but I've been camping and I've been to a summer day camp, so I figured it's kind of like that, It's just kind of a fun little, hey, let's play games and, do some sports, do some, archery, do whatever, go for a swim, water sports, all the camp stuff. So that's basically what it's about. And it does a really good job. It just makes you feel like, hey, these are a bunch of fun-loving kids. Our final girl, and sort of Steve Christie's first hire, is Alice, played by Adrienne King. She's wonderful in this movie. Also, there's a very young Kevin Bacon. And his girl is played by Janine Taylor, who plays Marcy. And then there's Brenda, and she is, it's been a while, played by Laurie Bartram. And Harry Crosby, who's the son of Bing Crosby, plays Bill, who's kind of your tech guy go-to, like he knows when to turn the generator on when it's failing or whatnot, and he's kind of your man about the cabins, basically. Your man about camp, if you will. And then there's Ned. And Ned came up with Kevin Bacon and Janine Taylor's characters. And Ned is played by Mark Nelson. And he's kind of the third wheel in their group. And, I think he kind of secretly wants to be with Janine Taylor's character, Marcy. there's one scene that's just a beautiful scene in this movie where he's just kind of, you see like Jack and Marcy. Jack is Kevin Bacon's character, by the way. So Jack and Marcy are kind of, they're sort of like walking, you know, along the lake, and it's early evening, and they're just kind of flirting and frolicking. And then you see him on the other, it pans to him on the other end of the lake, and he's just kind of shaking his head like, that Kevin Bacon, man, he gets all the girls, he gets all the chicks, man. What gives, you know? And he's just, you know, you can just tell he's just feeling like a third wheel. And so he just, you know, then he's like summoned by, well, spoiler alert, what turns out to be Mrs. Voorhees. And he's like, hello, can I help you? And, spoiler alert, Mrs. Voorhees is Jason's mom, the infamous Jason. And she is the killer in this. And she's murdering everyone because her son, Jason, supposedly drowned in the lake in 1957, and this is present day 1980. So, she is basically out to sabotage the camp. She doesn't want it to reopen, and she blames the camp counselors who are too busy just making love while her poor boy drowned. Yeah, a lot to take in there. So she decides to just go on a murder spree, basically, and just kill the fuck out of everyone. And that's what she does. And she is a really strong lady, because, I mean, some of the kills in this movie require some muscle. There is a scene, and I'm just going to talk about that. I mean, again, spoiler alert here. Kevin Bacon is lying in his bunk, and up comes an arrow through the throat, with blood squirting out. And he's just, you know, and she's basically under the bed, you know, shoving an arrow up into his throat. And it's grisly as hell. The effects were done by Tom Savini, and he's great. How he basically did this was Kevin Bacon is sitting there like with a hole cut out for his head in the bunk, with a fake body lying down, and this is from what I understand and have read anyway. There might be other stories that could refute this, but this is the story I've always heard and read about, so I'm just going to go with that. You see, you know, kind of they have like a kind of a syringe thing full of blood, you know, like a turkey baster, and it's just pumping the fake blood out while he's and trying not to laugh his ass off, basically. So, and that's Kevin Bacon, early role. He had done like this movie and Animal House by this point. So that's where he's going. So Kevin Bacon is probably like the true star of the film that will go on to do other Hollywood blockbuster films we've all known and love. The rest of the crowd did like a lot of theatrical work in New York. The rest of the cast, and it was all filmed in upstate New Jersey in a place called Blairstown. And apparently every now and again they have screenings in Blairstown of this film. And I don't live back east. I've been back east before, but I really love the vibe there. It reminds me, I grew up in California and Nevada mainly, and Denver, Colorado, and places like that. But I did live in a town very similar called Nevada City, here in Northern California. Well, I'm in Nevada, but it's like an hour and a half away. I'm in Reno, so that's where that is. And it just has that similar kind of quaint vibe, and just small town, woodsy kind of feel. So that's like the town that's close to camp, and that's Blairstown, New Jersey. So, you know, our main characters start to realize, our main final girl, played by Adrienne King, who plays Alice, you know, she and Bill's character, and that would be Harry Crosby, tend to, they finally realize something's going on. Everyone's missing, and after a night of, after a day of working on the camp, going swimming for a bit, taking a break, having just a good summer frolicky day, evening sets in, and after playing strip Monopoly, kind of everyone goes their separate ways. They sort of realize, okay, something is amiss here. What is happening? And Jack and Marcy are the two fornicators, so of course they're the first to get killed, basically, and right after making love, because that's a thing that happens. And I mean, the kills are all impressive if you're into that kind of thing. I was more into it for the mystery aspect. I mean, because it is a good mystery, because you don't know who the hell the killer is. And it's, unlike the others where we all know it's Jason, this one just really ratcheted up that who the hell is doing all this and why, And it's pretty brilliant. And then the reveal of Mrs. Voorhees' reveal is pretty brilliant too. And Betsy Palmer, who has top billing in this film, but is only in it for the last 20 minutes, really. She is brilliant as this sort of grieving mom whose psychosis is gone off the rails. I mean, she is in full-on schizophrenic mode here. She also is hearing voices, and she's hearing Jason, basically egg her on to, kill her, mommy, kill her. And she's like, I will, Jason, But she's not too Grand Guignol about the whole affair. I mean, she's just trying to, she's pretty campy, but Steve, director, actually not Steve Miner, that was the director of part 2, but the director of this one is Sean S. Cunningham and Victor Miller. And Sean kind of, even though they're ripping off Halloween, and admittedly so, Sean S. Cunningham directed, Victor Miller wrote it, and that's kind of how this collaboration happened. Sean was able to kind of rein in Betsy Palmer in certain scenes so she wouldn't go too, Grand Guignol and everything, which worked out really well. Sean and Victor had been kind of working together for a while, collaborating, and what brought them to Friday the 13th is they had made kind of borderline adult films. Sean S. Cunningham also worked with Wes Craven on Last House on the Left, which was pretty vicious and borderline horror porn, basically. I mean, it had some pretty explicit scenes there. And they did make some adult films as well, like borderline adult films. Then they said, okay, according to audiences out there, they really want family films. And, they're mainstream, let's make family films, and Disney type films. Well, apparently those films weren't doing so well. I think they made a movie called Manny's Orphans before this, and that just didn't do quite well. Tanked at the box office. So they're like, okay, the public lied, let's go back to horror. So Halloween had just come out, and Sean S. Cunningham told Victor Miller, all right, we're going to go ahead and rip off Halloween. Go watch Halloween, dig up all the storyline you can on it, and let's just go rip it off with just a different setting, basically. So as opposed to suburban Midwest America, which was what the Halloween setting was, they went for the back East Coast summer camp setting, and that was what they were going for. So it worked. That worked for them, and it really does have a mystery vibe. The gore, I guess, was shocking for the day. I mean, there's an axe to the face and that kind of thing, and Kevin Bacon's infamous arrow through the throat, and a lot of impaling and that kind of thing. So it was pretty, it was gory for the day. But it wasn't there was still that mystery there. And it's halfway through the movie, it starts to rain, and that just kind of adds the whole ambiance of it all. And then the rain kind of stops toward the end, and you have this kind of clearing. But it's I'm not going to go through everything in the film. I mean, if you haven't seen it by now, like, definitely check it out. It's a classic. It's definitely a classic. Because this is like the premier slasher movie, Siskel and Ebert hated this movie, and they both gave it thumbs down, bad reviews, saying that, calling it misogynistic, because it's one of those films that puts women in peril, and it just, according to them, just is so jovial about the whole process. It just loves watching women just in peril, and helpless and about to be murdered. That was their whole take on this thing. Okay, but the killer was a woman. So I don't know if the whole misogyny thing really holds up, but okay, all right, that's your vibe, that's what you're going for. Cool. I don't know, I don't buy it. And a lot of people called them out on their bullshit for that one, including myself. I think that, did you watch the film, fellas? And apparently they did, but still felt it was misogynistic in a certain way, even though you have a female killer and the guys get it just as bad. So, yeah, I don't know. I love it when people call this film an 80s film. Yes, it came out in May of 1980. But, it was shot in 79, and most of the scenes anyway, and it just has a late 70s vibe to it all around. I mean, the 80s, as I've discussed with a friend several times, and a few friends actually, the 80s didn't really come into its own until like 84. It was still very much the late 70s up until about 84. And I think that's a very important aspect before you just call this an 80s movie. Yes, it came out in 1980, but the vibe is very late 70s. In fact, every decade kind of comes into its own, I would say the fourth year in, because it takes a while for fashions and styles to change. So, yeah, there you go. What else can I say about this movie? Why is it awesome? Like, what makes it great? Like, what makes you want to run out and see it? I mean, there's a nostalgia factor, because I was 7 when it came out, and I'd heard of summer camp. I'd been to like day camp around that time and prior, or actually after. But it just kind of hit that vibe spot on. Meatballs with Bill Murray came out a year before that, came out in 79, and Meatballs definitely has a summer camp vibe, and that's a comedy. Now, there's one horror element where they're all around the campfire telling a story, and Bill Murray just freaks everyone out, basically. And that was great. That was awesome. It's a good film. I think it still holds up. Is it dated? Yeah. And, I've heard people say it looks like it was whatever film filter they used. I mean, it looks like it was filmed in some scenes, with a dirty beer glass. and it's kind of obvious. I mean, it's very true actually. But it's a fun film. It's fun, I guess, for millennial audiences or Gen Z audiences. Would they get a kick out of it? Maybe, for all its hokiness and everything else. I mean, I get a kick out of it for its hokiness, and it is hokey in some scenes, but it also has this real sense of mystery and dread. The opening scene, I'm just going to talk about the opening scene. So it takes, it starts in 1957 before jumping to present day 1980, and that's when the murders began, apparently. And there were a couple counselors that were, I guess this was right after Jason drowned, or like a year, let's see, the same year, he drowned in 57. So this was kind of later on that year. and there are a couple of camp counselors are singing Michael, row your boat ashore, and they're just sitting there, you know, with the guitar, Michael, row your boat ashore, hallelujah, you know, and they're just making eyes at each other, like this guy and this girl, and the girl's playing guitar, and this guy's sitting by the campfire, oh, yeah, you know, let's get it on later, you know, and they end up getting it on, of course, and well, they start to get it on. They go up into this like attic of one of the, it looks like a loft type thing above one of the cabins, and then of course the killer, who we all know now as Mrs. V, Mrs. Voorhees, is up there, and we don't know who it is yet. This is the first scene of the film, and they're like all, we weren't doing anything, we were just, and then she stabs the guy and starts chasing the girl. And it's a POV shot from Voorhees, you know, Mrs. Voorhees' perspective, chasing this girl Claudette, and she is just really freaking out. She is just like, oh my god, and she's throwing like boxes at her, and then she goes, you know, she's cornered, has nowhere to go, and she's just like, ah, right, and it pans to her. And then it goes just to white screen, to big block, Friday the 13th title, smashing through glass, dun dun, you know, and that's your title. Brilliant, great way to start a film, great way, awesome, and it really is effective. Now, you know, I've talked to a lot of people about like, what would you do in this situation? Like when you're cornered in a loft. You know, first of all, we now know it's a middle-aged woman who happens to be really strong. I mean, she's got like, you know, incredible Hulk type strength apparently. But, you know, I mean, wouldn't you try to maybe not just throw an empty box at her, but try to pick up something heavy? And I mean, we'd all like to think we'd be badass in that situation, but who knows? We might just cower and you know. And that's basically what, you know, that would be like the last moments of her life. So, I don't know. Like it makes you think about, hey, what would I do in this situation? Would I be a badass, or would I just cower? Or just scream or freeze, or would I try to run, or, you know, run toward them? I would think my adrenaline would kick in, and I would just, you know, eventually be the badass, but I don't know. Even like with a middle-aged woman with superhuman strength. I mean, and she, by the way, what I love about this movie is she's not supposed to be superhuman. She's not Jason Voorhees. She's not zombie Jason Voorhees yet. She is like just a middle-aged woman who happens to have a lot of passion in doing what she's doing. And it's all misplaced grief, basically. But she's really strong, and, you know, she's apparently can move bodies and lift the guys, you know, and position them in certain angles, you know, like movie serial killers do. So it's all very silly, but it's all very like, how the hell did she do that, you know? And again, going back to the Kevin Bacon death scene, like, you know, shoving an arrow through a mattress, like, how do you know he's not laying on this side? I mean, you kind of see the indentation, so how do you know you're going to hit his neck? I mean, you could hit something else. I mean, I don't know. It's just how do you know you're going to go through the throat? So it's a very, very interesting film. And I mean, there's a lot to talk about, you know, and from the reality angle, if you want to do that. But it's also just a, you know, campy, no pun intended, good time. And I highly recommend it. Another scene that's kind of interesting, and it reminds me of my grandmother a little bit. There's a scene. So you think that Robbie Morgan's character is going to be the final girl, because it kind of starts out with present day with her. It's like after the 57, you know, 2 camp counselors getting murdered, it goes to 1980, the present, and you see Robbie Morgan hitchhiking, and she's basically going to be the cook for the camp. Ironically, Mrs. V was the cook for the camp. Good old Mrs. Voorhees, good old Pamela Voorhees. That's her full name, by the way. And so she's like the first to get murdered, you know, and she's just on her way there. She's not even there yet. So she's hitchhiking, and she catches the wrong ride, and Mrs. V picks her up, and anyway, chases her through the woods. And just watch the movie. It's suspenseful. It's good. Harry Manfredini's music is really good. It's a lot of violins and you know, kind of the stuff. But anyway, there's a scene when Mrs. Voorhees picks her up, and she's not saying a word to her, and she's just, you know, Bobby Morgan, Annie, who plays Annie, that's her character's name, Annie, she's just jibber jabbering through the whole time, just blah 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 blah, you know. But she says something like, this is what reminds me of my grandmother. She said, I can't believe that they call children kids. It sounds like little goats, which is what my grandmother used to say, you know, like they're called children. Kids is slang for little goats. And this thinking, I remember like learning that when I was 7, right around the time this film came out. So I'm like, thanks Grandma, when to grow on, you know? So, yeah, that was kind of an interesting educational moment for people that didn't know that, I guess. But she's also like just really passionate about what she's doing. She's like, oh, you know, when you've had a dream as long as I have, and, you know, to cook for a bunch of, you know, bratty camp kids, like, yay, you know. Like, she's just so just enthused to be there. And it's just a brilliant scene because, you know, Mrs. V, who's the driver, is not saying a word to her. And then they finally like pass the turnoff to Camp Crystal Lake. And she's like, hey, isn't there the turnoff to Camp Crystal Lake back there? You know. And, you know, then she's like, has to jump out of the Jeep, and Robbie Morgan's actually a stunt woman, and she does this kind of somersault out of the Jeep. You know, you'd think she'd break her neck, you know, and she lands this really close to a rock, but, you know, starts booking through the woods, and of course, you know, Mrs. V catches up to her, and so that happens. Again, spoiler alert for this, you know, 43-year-old film. It's weird to think that this movie came out just a month around, like apart from like The Shining and The Empire Strikes Back. And it makes you just think about silly thoughts, or at least it makes me think about silly thoughts. Like, imagine if Mrs. V and Darth Vader switch places. When I reviewed Deadly Eyes, I was talking to a friend after I did that, and I said, imagine if we replaced every major, you know, screen villain, cinematic villain, with the rats from Deadly Eyes, including Darth Vader. Yes, I have a wild imagination. But anyway, so obviously that gets a chuckle from some people. Other people just look at me horrified, or like a deer in headlights, like, what the fuck, you know? But, yeah, that's where my mind goes on those things. So that's just me. So Friday the 13th, 1980, the one that started it all. It holds up, but it is dated. You know, again, it's very late 70s, but it does hold up on a mystery suspense type of thriller. And it's definitely worth checking out. So if you haven't seen it by now, definitely go out and see it. And I will catch you in the next one. Take care.